Thank you so much. Great to be with everybody again. This has been a real surprising joy of this ongoing pandemic to discover all these opportunities for Torah study that we've been having all this time and didn't even know it. I've shared in the chat a link to the document, and I'll do it again in case you missed that. So you can access it, open it, and manipulate it as you choose. I will also share screen, and I'll share a little bit larger than in the past. Got some requests for larger print. This week we are reading Parashat Shemini. Shemini means the eighth, and it's the eighth day after Aharon and his sons, the Kohanim, have been in a kind of quarantine for a week to prepare for the inauguration of the Mishkan. There were the tabernacle. There were meticulous parshiot, full meticulous instructions of how to build it, and then they did that. And then before its inauguration, so that God could have a dwelling place and be close to the people, the Kohanim had a week of preparation, and on the eighth day, our parsha begins with the inauguration. So this is a day of excitement, of danger, and of thrill. I'm going to share my screen and we will go right into it. What I titled this is, Why Did Nadav and Avihu Die? So that's already kind of a spoiler alert to what we're going to see momentarily as we read the Parsha. Things go very well, and then they go apparently very, very wrong, probably. But let's see what happens. In order to begin, we really have to read the end of last week's Parsha, Parshat Tzav, to get context. So we're going to start at the end of Parshat Tzav, from the end of chapter 8, and then here where my cursor is now, the beginning of chapter 9, that is where Parshat Shemini begins. So the end of chapter 8. Moshe said to Aharon and his sons, Aharon is Moshe's older brother and the chief priest, Kohen, boil the flesh at the entrance of the tent of meeting and eat it there with the bread that is in the installation basket, as I commanded, saying, Aharon and his sons shall eat it. And what is left of the flesh and the bread you shall burn in fire. And from the entrance of the tent of meeting, you shall not go out for 7 days until the day of completion of your days of installation. Yemei milu'echem. For 7 days shall your installation be. As was done on this day, Adonai has commanded to do, to atone for you. And at the entrance of the tent of meeting, you shall sit day and night for 7 days, and you shall keep Adonai's watch, that you may not die, for so I have been commanded. And Aharon and his sons did all the things that Adonai had commanded through Moshe. Wait a week, and hear today's Parsha. And it happened on the 8th day that Moshe called to Aharon and his sons and to the elders of Israel, etc., 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 some more details. And Moshe said, this is the thing that Adonai has commanded you do, that the glory of Adonai may appear to you. And Moshe said to Aharon, come forward to the altar and do your purification offering, the chatat, and your burnt offering, the olah, and atone for yourself and for the people, and do the people's offering and atone for them, as Adonai has commanded, etc., etc., a couple more details. And Aharon's sons brought the blood to him, and the fat, and the kidneys, and the lobe from the liver, from the purification offer, turned into smoke on the altar, as Adonai commanded Moshe. Some more details. And he brought forth the burnt offering, and he did it according to regulation, kamishpat. A few more details. The breasts and the right thighs, Aharon elevated in an elevation offering before Adonai, as Moshe had commanded. And Aharon lifted his hands toward the people and blessed them. And he came down from having done the purification offering, the chatat, the burnt offering, the olah, and the offering of well-being, the shlamim. And Moshe and Aaron came into the tent of meeting and went out and blessed the people. And the glory of Adonai, Kavod Adonai, appeared to all the people. And a fire went out from before Adonai and consumed on the altar the burnt offering and the fat. And all the people saw and shouted with joy, Vayaronu, and they fell on their faces. And the sons of Aharon, Nadav and Avihu, took each man his fire pan, put kindling in it, and laid incense on it. And they brought forward before Adonai alien fire, which God had not commanded them. And fire came forth from Adonai and consumed them, and they died before Adonai. And Moshe said to Aharon, this is as Adonai spoke, saying, through those close to me shall I be hallowed, and in all the people's presence shall I be honored. Bikrovai ekadesh v'al penei chol ha'am ekaved. And Aharon was silent. I'll stop the share for a moment. I want us to just take in, what do you make of those events that just transpired? Our real question is, our core question, why did Nadav and Avihu die? It might help you to think about this as though you're a theater or film director. How would you stage this? What motivated Nadav and Avihu to run forward? What's the meaning of strange fire, which had not been commanded? Eish zara, asher lo tziva Adonai. What are the important themes here? What do we learn about sacred service, about the sanctuary? What do you make of this? So you can put questions in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll call on you. Rebecca Rubin, and then Esther Westelman after that.
Oh, okay. Well, it seems to me, obviously, that they've overstepped their bounds. I mean, it's not clear what their motivation was, but they were not listening to God, and they were not following the rules. And so that's why they were punished.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Esther, and then Tom Odom, and then Tanya. Esther, you're still muted.
Okay. First of all, I have a question about the reason that the two boys did that. Was it ambition? What is egoism? But whatever the reason is, I think the punishment was personally too severe. Okay. And my second comment was, and you said, and Aaron was silent, but the Hebrew word is even stronger than silent, because Vaidom is like to be, he was in shock, obviously, but Vaidom is to be still, because I'm thinking of Shemesh Begivon Dom, the sun doesn't move, or the army military, when you have to stand still, they say Dom.
Right, so maybe a good translation would be, and Aaron was stunned silent.
Yeah.
Something like that. Great, thank you, Esther. Ginger, go ahead. You're muted, Ginger. Ginger, you're on mute still. There you go.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I got it. I agree with what was said before. I don't think the punishment fit the crime. Were there any rules that I didn't notice any rules said beforehand that what they did was wrong? I mean, we're only supposed to do what God asked. I don't remember him saying, do this, do this, do this, give him like a formula. And so I think that the two men had good intentions. And I mean, I don't mean disrespectful, but I don't think it was very nice, because their intentions were good. If it had been looked at from another point of view, I don't know. I'm not God. I don't know why God thought that way, but I think it was punishment didn't fit the crime.
Great,
Did he even take the time? Did God even take the time to understand why they did that? And what was so wrong with what they did?
Thank you, Ginger. Tanya, go ahead. You're muted, Tanya.
Rabbi, I wonder if maybe, and I have read some commentary, that this was not their job. And maybe they were caught up in the ecstasy of the moment, because it's not every day that Hashem would drop by the Ohel Moed. And maybe in their enthusiasm and their zeal and their ecstasy, you know, they wanted to do something. They felt that they had to do some kind of action. And I had just read some rabbinic commentary that this was actually the job of the high priest. And this is also parallel to what happened when King David was bringing the Ark of the Covenant back. And Uzzah, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, the oxen tripped. And he reached out to steady the ark, and he fell dead because everything was a breach of protocol. They were not supposed to put the ark on the cart. They were not supposed to touch the ark. They were supposed to put the poles in it.
Yeah, in fact, that's the Haftarah for Parashat Shemini, if I remember correctly, that the rabbis pair those stories as being very connected. Tanya, you know, that's part of what we're doing here also is to understand what's motivating different rabbinic commentaries and to understand what the rabbinic commentaries are doing. And there are 12 different explanations in rabbinic literature as to what the reason was for Nadav and Avihu's being killed. Some of them are similar to each other, and it means that it's an ambiguous parsha. But what we have to do is look carefully. All of them are responding to the biblical text and taking what we see literarily and responding to it. So it's important. What we're doing is looking carefully at the biblical text to try to understand what's motivating these different plausible rabbinic responses. So thanks for opening that up. Got a lot of hands here. Rivka, go ahead. Rivka Cooper. Rivka seems frozen. Oh, maybe I'm frozen.
I see it as their fire pan, and they offered before the Lord alien joined upon them. So basically, God had not asked them to do this anyways. So they had tried to help God without asking for without God needing their help. So arrogance is basically the way that I saw their punishment.
Great, thank you. Paul Wilson, go ahead.
Yes, the specifics I'll leave to the rabbis, but the underlying principle, I think Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove of Park Avenue Synagogue put very well. Innovation, they innovated somehow. And all rituals began at a certain point in time. All rituals evolve and change, but we don't want them to change drastically. We have to ease into the changes in ritual. And this has contemporary relevance to Reform practice, Orthodox practice. These are still developing, but you got to go slowly. You have to conserve as well as innovate. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Jennifer Malvin, that'll be the last comment in this section. Then we'll look at the chat a little bit, and then we'll go back into the text and see what we can uncover.
Oh, hey, thanks. I'm drinking this in. Thanks very much. I wondered, when I look at the verse, chapter 10, bait, second verse, where you have a lot of vavs, vav tetzeh, esh, the vav tochal, and the vav, va yam tu. I got to look at the vowels. Anyway, so you have a lot of action, and I wondered what you made of that, and also the similarity between this second verse aside from the vavs and the drama of it all, you've got the same wording literally in verse 24, directly above, where the fire went out from before Adonai and consumed on the altar, but except instead of consuming on the altar, it's consuming the sons. It's literally the same words. And so I didn't know what you wanted to make of anything, of any of that.
Great. Yeah, there's a real literary parallelism that what we've just seen is this incredibly dramatic and positive and exciting moment where were they going to get the offering right? Would it be accepted by God? It was accepted by God. God's glory appears to them. What that means exactly is hard for us to know, but it seems like something dramatic. They're visualizing, seeing some manifestation of God. Kvod Adonai nira alehem. And they break into Rina, joyous song. They fall on their faces. Everything couldn't have been better. And then in the moment, Aaron's sons go in and bring something, a fire offering of some sort, bring some kindling that was not commanded, and the fire consumes them. Just as the fire had consumed and lapped up the Olah offering, the burnt offering, they have now that same fire has consumed them, Nadav and Avihu, as though they are a burnt offering. And that Rina, but we went from Vayaronu to Vayidom. Visually, they're almost identical words. Vayaronu is like joyful song. Rina, Ron, and a Resh and a Daled are visually almost identical. Julie, as a Soferet, knows very well, as a scribe, the perils of making them look too similar, but how easily one can stumble and make a Resh and a Daled look too similar, or to misread one and write it the wrong way. But Aharon's response of Vayidom, being in stunned silence, is both the exact opposite and just separated by a few dots of ink from Vayaronu, from joyful, songful celebration. Let's go back into the text. I want to bring attention to a few things. Well, actually, before we do that, many people, both in the chat and vocally, shared some version of, as Tanya put in the chat, there's no room for creativity in the Mishkan, or the problem was in general too much innovation, not enough conformity, etc. Nechama Leibovitz reads it that way. Not surprising. Nechama Leibovitz, and the Bible commentator and educator Nechama Leibovitz, she and her brother Yeshayahu Leibovitz were famous for really emphasizing philosophically the importance of commandedness and unquestioning obedience to commandments. But I want to problematize that a little bit, because if the whole point of the story is that there should be no freelancing, no innovation, no creativity, and that obedience is the way, why didn't God strike down Miriam and Moshe and the people for the Song of the Sea? That was an innovation. That was a creative enterprise. To push it even further, Elijah the prophet in the Book of Kings comes out of hiding, where he's been, wanted for the death sentence by the tyrannical Jewish government governing Eretz Israel at the time of King Achav. Achav wants Eliyahu to execute him. Eliyahu has been in hiding, comes out and does this really dramatic sacrifice that God never commanded him to do, and God rewards him for it and punishes Achav. So there are many other examples where Moshe or other leaders or people innovate spiritual matters. And so I want to complicate the Nechama Leibovitz response. I want to look at the chat for a second, see what's there. All right, going back, let's see what we've seen. It wasn't a commanded sacrifice. Ritual conformity is a virtue in Leviticus. They were killed as punishment for Aaron making the golden calf, according to the Midrash. That seems a little bit strange, or I'd be interested in like what the hook would be of the text, because God already gave punishment for the golden calf, killed 24,000 people, I think the number was. What is Ishara? Maybe drinking on the job. Alcohol is mentioned later. We'll get to that. I see your hand, Ginger. I got in trouble with my parents for doing stuff I wasn't told to do, and they yelled at me but didn't kill me. So maybe this is excessive. Depends on what you did, though. Let's see. Sons did not have permission to bring the incense. Once again, though, Miriam and Moshe didn't have commandment or permission to innovate the song of the sea. In the biblical world, is death the punishment? Death is a punishment for many things, not for all things, not the most standard punishment. This was innovation, it was new, right? Hannah innovates prayer, and that was wonderful. She's praised for it. There's a lot of innovation. Prophets didn't have to keep to the same level. I'm not sure what that means, level of what. Aaron's sons being punished in front of the community reminds me of when a parent's children are scolded in front of an audience. So what's the purpose of that? Ginger asks, why were the men killed? Because of what Isaac did. The golden calf was made. The golden calf was Aaron. Isaac is many generations earlier in the book of Genesis. The golden calf was made because there was no rule about doing this. These people were out of Egypt for 1 month. They were an immature people, no rules. Moses was their leader. Maybe Aaron did the golden calf because he had many people pressured against him, not the strongest leader. But then if that's the case, why is it Aaron isn't punished? Aaron is rewarded. He does it right here. Why are his sons killed? Okay, there's a lot more there. Let's go back into the text. I see more hands, but I also want to make sure that we can cover some things. Spiritual birth and not death. Okay, here we go. So first of all, in defense of what a bunch of you said, as you'll see, I've bolded in the text. There is definitely a over-the-top emphasis, a leitmotif of commandments. If you look in the end of Parashat Tzav last week, everything about the quarantine and the preparation for the day of the inauguration is about choreography to a T. Look at how many times the Torah specifies, do this as I commanded, do that as was commanded to you to do, do as you've been commanded, as you've been commanded. And when things go well at the beginning of Shemini, the beginning of our parsha, this is the thing Adonai has commanded you. Do as Adonai has commanded, as Adonai has commanded, according to regulation, as Adonai commanded. And with the sons, there's a reversal of that. They brought forth fire before, they brought forward before Adonai alien fire, which God had not commanded them. So in defense of what a lot of you said, there does seem to be a real emphasis in this text about commandment and not commandment. Let's quickly look at other biblical texts that refer to this case to see how intra-biblical commentary might be happening to shed some light. First of all, this might be irrelevant or it might not, but right after our parsha, so what we just saw in verse 3, Moshe responds to Aaron about what happened with this very cryptic, poetic response, and Aaron is silent. And then there are a few verses of Moshe giving instructions to the cousins about like coming and getting the corpses out and not letting death maintain in the tabernacle. And then the next focus to Aaron and the sons in verse 8, God spoke to Aaron. By the way, that itself is very rare. It only happens a few times in the Torah. God usually speaks to Moshe to speak to Aaron, or sometimes speaking to Moshe and Aaron together. God speaking to Aaron exclusively happens just here and one or two other times, I think. Wine and liquor do not drink, you and your sons with you, when you enter the tent of meeting, that you may not die. This is an eternal law for your generations, and to distinguish between the sacred and the profane, between the impure and the pure, and to teach the Israelites all the laws which Adonai has spoken to them by the hand of Moshe. So if right after this event happens, God speaks to Aaron saying, you and your sons don't drink liquor when you go into the tent of meeting, that might imply that that's what Nadav and Avihu had done. They had drunk liquor and gone into the tabernacle. Now, it's strange that it wasn't mentioned. That seems like that would have been an important detail to mention. Maybe that's why, but be that as it may, maybe that's why God says it to Aaron here. If not, it's a little random. There have been other collections of the laws of the Kohanim. Why here, in the middle of a crisis, does God say, oh, by the way, no liquor in the tabernacle? The next time, in chapter 16, the beginning of Parashat Acharei Mot, Adonai spoke to Moshe after the death of the two sons of Aaron, who came forward before Adonai and died. Bekorvotam lifnei Adonai ve'amutu. And Adonai said to Moshe, speak to Aaron, your brother, that he not come at all times into the sacred zone, HaKodesh, within the curtain in front of the cover that's upon the ark, lest he die. For in the cloud I shall appear over the cover. So maybe according to this, maybe the problem was just coming forward, not at the appropriate time. This is dangerous. It's like when you tell your young children, you have to cross the street when the light is green and when you've looked both ways and there are no cars coming. Crossing the street is dangerous. So you don't do it any time. You have to do it when it's the appropriate time. Almost as if to say maybe Nadav and Avihu weren't punished, but it's that it was a radioactive place. God's presence is potentially lethal. Remember what God said to Moshe in chapter 34 of the book of Shemot, of Exodus, when Moses is asking for more intimacy after when they're rehabilitating after the golden calf, and says, I want to see your face. And God says, you can't see my face. Not that I'm not letting you, but lo yirani hadam b'chai. A person can't see my face and live. God has a face, but seeing it would be lethal. God is too intense. And if God is filling the sanctuary, it's dangerous. Traffic is coming. Don't come in at all times. It has to be specifically at the right time, otherwise it's too dangerous. In Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 3, it says, these are the names of Aaron's sons, the firstborn Nadav and Avihu, Elazar and Itamar. Those are the names of Aaron's sons, the anointed priests whom he installed to serve as priests. But Nadav and Avihu died before Adonai when they brought forward alien fire before Adonai in the wilderness of Sinai, etc. So if in chapter 16 of Vayikra, the problem is bekorvotam lifnei Adonai, in their coming close at the wrong time, in Numbers 3, it seems like the problem is what they brought forward. They brought forward the hakrivam esh zara. So was the problem their coming too close? Was the problem what they brought? And in light of these ambiguities, I've listed here all the different views just of the 3rd century Tanaim. There are other midrashic interpretations later in rabbinic literature, but these, I think it's 7 interpretations that I've summarized here and given you links if you want to follow them up, the Sefaria links. Why were Nadav and Avihu killed? And I think just seeing this overview can be helpful to get a sense of, well, what's common and what's different and what is ambiguous in the story. So in a midrash in the Sifra, which is a midrashic work, 3rd century rabbinic work on the book of Vayikra, of Leviticus, Rabbi Akiva focuses on the Eish Zara, the alien fire. As Bamidbar's Numbers said, and said that the reason they were punished was because they brought coals from an unsanctioned, unsanctified, profane source. Instead of using the purified stock that they had been using for the proper offering, they just grabbed whatever coals were around. It was alien fire. the source of it was wrong. So going in when they went in wasn't necessarily a problem, but you have to use the proper materials. They were punished for that. Rabbi Ishmael, in one place, rejects Rabbi Akiva, says that no, their coals weren't any different. He focuses on the leitmotif here about commandment and says it's which God had not commanded them. It's not that the fire source was any different than the successful ones they brought. It's that they brought it on their own volition without being instructed to do so. And that raises questions about what about these other times of innovation that we've talked about. Rabbi Ishmael, in a different place, explains that Nadav and Avihu must have been drunk when they entered, as Tanya recalled this midrash. That's why God immediately intervened to tell Aaron nobody can do priestly service drunk. I should have told you this. I thought it was obvious. It's going to be very dangerous. So now I'll make it a commandment. Don't come in drunk into the tabernacle. You saw what happened. On the other hand, there was no commandment not to do that. There's no indication. The Torah doesn't say that they took a drink. In fact, the narrative makes it seem like it was a really spontaneous action. Where were they getting liquor from? They were in quarantine for a week, and then things moved really quickly this morning. It doesn't say anything about them drinking. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili focuses on the Acharei Mot, Leviticus 16:1, to say they died on account of their drawing near, not on account of the offering. The offering was the same as anything else, but they crossed a boundary and drew too near to the divine when they weren't supposed to. The korvatam lifnei Adonai, asher lo tziva Adonai, which God had not commanded them. Rabbi Eliezer teaches, this is in the Talmud Bavli Eruvin, that their sin was teaching halacha in front of their teacher. Now that sounds really strange. To put it in rabbinic idiom, ikar chaser min hasefer. He's saying something that, like, if that's the case, the essential point seems to be really missing from the book. They had a reason for bringing the fire they brought. They thought it was called for by Torah law. Moshe was right there, though, and it was an affront to his leadership, to Aaron's leadership, to innovate and model a new interpretation of protocol in his presence. Shouldn't innovate a teaching in front of your teacher. It was impudent, according to Rabbi Eliezer. On the other hand, it doesn't seem like they were teaching or instructing anything. Things were moving very fast, and this is a pretty broad application. There's an anonymous view back in the Sifra that their sin was that they didn't show respect to Aaron, nor to Moshe, nor even with each other. It wasn't that they were objectively too close and their offering wasn't objectively wrong. The impetuousness itself was the problem, not thinking before they acted, not seeking a second opinion. There's another anonymous view in the Sifra that there was nothing at all untoward about this offering, but Nadav and Avihu had been condemned to die at this moment, much earlier, back at Mount Sinai. This midrash imagines that back then there must have been an off-screen moment when they saw Moshe and Aaron walking first and they behind them, and the Israelites behind them. And Nadav said to Avihu, soon these two old guys are going to die, and we will lead the community. Now, that's an odd midrash on its face, given that the Torah does tell us things about why they died, too close, and they're bringing forth Eish Zara, like things that were not commanded. Why is the Midrash inventing this peculiar backstory? I want to stop the share, and I want to share a few reflections about this, and then we'll open it up to reactions. I actually think there's a common thread, even though, with all due respect to the machlokot, to the disputes between these 7 different views, even within Rabbi Ishmael himself, it says two contradictory things. I think there's a common thread of, at least in this context, going off script. And I want to be cautious at overreading that, but I also want to be cautious at underreading that. The overread, like Nechama Leibovitz's read, is to say that, the point of the Torah is that we meticulously hew to whatever has been commanded, and that there's no religious purpose to any innovation. And I think there are too many examples in the Tanakh that really run against that, such as the Song of the Sea, such as Eliyahu's offering, and many others, such as, if we really want to talk about danger, Pinchas's zealotry. Pinchas goes in when there's a national security crisis, a national pagan orgy, that the Jewish people are being swallowed into the pagan orgy practices of Midian and Moab, and God commands Moshe how to intervene. Moshe does something else, disregards God's explicit commandment and does something else, tries to take out the leadership. The leadership doesn't respond. In a moment of where nobody is following protocol, Pinchas goes in and innovates and kills the two most flagrant perpetrators. And God responds, stops the plague, and rewards Pinchas with an eternal covenant of the priesthood. That seems thematically connected to Nadav and Avihu. Why is Pinchas rewarded for his impetuousness and not seeking counsel, and Nadav and Avihu are either punished or, I don't want to overinterpret it. They're killed. There are some later commentators that say that in a sense they weren't killed. It's more like Eliyahu being taken up alive. Some modern people like to say they're rewarded for it. I think the text runs against that. But Pinchas was most certainly a Levite, and that's actually a most important feature of that text. The text goes out of its way to emphasize that he's a Levite, and his being rewarded with Brit Kehunat Olam, with the eternal priestly covenant, is that his line become the lead Kohanim because of that. Miriam is also a Levite. Eliyahu, what tribe is Eliyahu from? I don't remember what tribe Eliyahu is from. But Pinchas and Miriam are most certainly Levites. So here's the sense that I would like to offer. I think that the Torah is very emphatic here about this context. There are contexts in which creativity and innovation are really praiseworthy and necessary to the thriving of a people. And there are contexts in which they're inappropriate, they're impetuous, they're rude, and in some cases, lethally dangerous. So one rabbi I was talking to who loves the innovative spirit, a few years ago, we were in a conversation about this. And this rabbi was reading Nadav and Avihu as a great example, even the fact that the language of the Havdalah ceremony comes from this parsha. And they were trying to read this as, so this is a story that proves that our tradition commemorates the innovative spirit, and Nadav and Avihu live with us forever. And I was like, well, Nadav and Avihu were killed. This seems to be a story about the lethal implications of the innovative spirit. However, what this rabbi was tapping into is that the Hasidic tradition, certain Hasidic traditions in particular, do pick up on some of these literary comparisons we're drawing. And they say that Nadav and Avihu are Eliyahu HaNavi, are Pinchas. They typically don't mention Miriam, but that's, I think, androcentrism of the writers more than anything else. I think Miriam would be a similar energy. But there's a time and a place for anything. What I said to this rabbi is, imagine, in your congregation, you've spent months choreographing your Yom Kippur service. You've got people and roles assigned to make sure that all the diverse voices in the community are heard at the right time. Nobody's taking up too much space, and that things don't go over time. They do intense rehearsals and practice. And when they want to do provocative things, it's really being curated theatrically. So let's say you're having a really intense moment where something that you've really curated with a lot of care is going off to a T, and people are getting into the intense, joyous spirit of Yom Kippur, not just a happy, but really the intense joy of self-recreation. And in the spirit of that, two guys in your community, of course they're going to be guys, who maybe are on the leadership team or see themselves as having some privilege, they run forward in the middle of it and like do some ecstatic dance and take over the bima because they're taken over by the moment. That's not the moment for it. Now there, the stakes are much lower, but those same two people might be amazing on a shul retreat during downtime, or when at the last minute there was a program and something happened, like the person who was supposed to facilitate got sick, or the materials didn't show up, and now all of a sudden there's an hour of unstructured time and what to do, or people are losing their energy. Those two same people might be exactly the energy you want in that moment. Had Nadav and Avihu might have been two of the people who most got people excited during the Song of the Sea. It's not that the energy has no place, the innovative spirit, but for God's sakes, these guys know better. They spent a week in quarantine with their father and two brothers, rehearsing and rehearsing and rehearsing. They know exactly how this is supposed to go. They've been told to great detail how dangerous this is going to be. Imagine that there's a political movement that is planning a dangerous confrontation with authority, with power. Let's say there's a group of Ukrainian rebels, or the Black Lives Matter movement, or the ACT UP disabled movement in the 90s, doing a confrontation with oppressive law enforcement, or the Ukrainians or Russian citizens doing a protest against Putin. And in the middle of it, a couple of hotheads decide that they've got the spirit of the moment and they're going to freelance a different thing that has not been choreographed by the demonstration organizers. That could get everybody killed. If you're facing off against the police or the army or whatever the case may be, you could get everybody killed. Now here, I don't want to compare, God to tyrannical police or something. And I think we have to be cautious with this. The point is that this is dangerous. The same activity, bringing everybody to run forward and engage in ecstatic dance might be amazing at a certain time, but if it's a street and there's traffic, it's really dangerous. And they knew better. I think the point that Nadav and Avihu aren't random Israelites. There might have been lots of Israelites who were taken over by the ecstatic spirit. In fact, we know they were. Vayaronu ha'am. Everybody was taken over by ecstatic song and they fell on their faces. But regular civilians didn't freelance and run forward and offer a sacrifice. It was these two guys, Nadav and Avihu's privilege, which taught them how to know how to be disciplined, but which they violated in order to take advantage of the moment. There's no place for that here. And I think what our sages are telling us, I think, is that we can simultaneously say that the innovative spirit, the same character traits that lead to creativity and innovative spirit might manifest in positive and negative ways. That ultimately Nadav and Avihu are the same kinds of people as Pinchas, of Miriam, of Elijah the prophet. But there's a time and a place when God has emphasized over and over again, according to protocol, according to protocol, according to protocol, take a week to practice, be in quarantine. You can't have any distractions. You have to go in exactly on schedule because this is lethal. This is very, very dangerous. Don't stray from the instructions. No other material, no other timing, no other offering. That's not the time for that. There are going to be plenty of times in life when inevitably the articulated commandments have not been sufficiently detailed to cover the surprising new event that is before us. And that's when you want those people to shine. But at a moment like this, that's dangerous. And you can turn the greatest ecstasy into the greatest tragedy, just like that. I want to note, I think, just to close, even the most, I think, far-reaching, fanciful of the midrashim that we looked at, that they must have been plotting already at Mount Sinai to like get these two old guys out of here. I think that's touching at this aspect of privilege. Lots of people were overcome by ecstasy at this moment. What led Nadav and Avihu to do something so egregiously against what they knew was protocol here in this moment? What led them to behave so differently from everybody else who's taken over by Rina? I think what led them to that is that the Midrash is imagining these must be guys who are like really into the status of Kohanim. Maybe that's what motivated them to make such poor judgment. Guys who have been dreaming of being in charge, being the head Kohanim for a long time, of being the hotshot next generation. They're the kinds of people who likely won't really internalize the message of discipline and protocol. You have to be really careful with them. There might be moments when they're useful, but you have to be really careful. I think that Midrash is really focusing on these guys' privilege and the error that it led them to. We're already 3 minutes over, so I will pause there and I'll turn it back to Julie and wish you a Shabbat Shalom and look forward to learning with you again.